Time is now 7 o'clock, and I'm calling to order and reconvening to open session the regular board meeting of Tuesday, February 20th, 2018. Jackie, can you call the roll, please?
Mr. Rasak.
Here.
Ms. Deming.
Here.
Mr. Rising.
Here.
Ms. Donahue.
Here.
Ms. Peel.
Here.
Mr. Karubas.
Here.
Ms. Price.
Here.
Ms. Price, will you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are now moving to our board salutes, and Mrs. Peel, will you begin?
The board salutes the 38 District 204 high school students who have met all the requirements to advance as finalists in the National Merit Scholarship Program. These students were chosen from the 16,000 semifinalists identified in September. We congratulate each student for this outstanding accomplishment. Good luck to all of you as you move forward in the competition. And I'm not naming all 38 of their names.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Mrs. Donahue.
Sure. The board salutes the 21 students from 7 middle schools who participated in the Indian Prairie School District 204 Spelling Bee. This year's competition went for 33 rounds. 3 8th grade students competed for the final 26 rounds to name the champion. Adi Tare from Crone took first place. Neha Jagandushan from Granger took second place, and 3 of Saye from Granger took third place. Addie captured the first place title with the word aberration. These 3 District 204 students will now move on to compete at the ComEd DuPage County Finals on February 28th at Wheaton North High School. We hope one of them will continue in the competition at the Scripps National Bee in May. Congratulations to all involved.
Thank you. Mrs. Price.
Okay, the board salutes 7 District 204 seniors who have been named from a pool of 4,500 candidates in the 2018 U.S. Presidential Scholars Program. From Negro Valley, Kiri Chen, Joyce Chen, Connor Purnell, and Justin Zhao. From Wabansi Valley, Gretchen Farmer, and from Matee Valley, Mega Prasad and Iris Shu. These candidates were selected from nearly 3.6 million students expected to graduate from U.S. high schools this year. Inclusion in the U.S. Presidential Scholars Program is one of the highest honors bestowed upon graduating high school seniors. Scholars are selected on the basis of superior academic and artistic achievements, leadership qualities, strong character, and involvement in community and school activities. Congratulations to all. That's impressive.
Yep. Thank you. It's time for student representative report. Today it's from Kaitlyn Backe from Neuqua Valley High School. Hi, Kaitlyn.
Hey, Kaitlyn.
The whole administrative team came to see you.
Yeah.
I know. I was talking to them before. They said they're gonna score me like the Olympics.
That's how we evaluate the superintendent.
Yeah.
Hello, I am Kaitlyn Backe, and I will be giving you some updates on what Neuqua has been up to lately. NV Dance finished second at the DVC conference. On January 17th, 18th, and 19th, we celebrated Recharge Week, which includes dress-up days and prizes to help get students and staff excited for school as they come back from break. On January 23rd, we had our World Music Concert. 2 days later, we had our multicultural show. On January 26th, we inducted 4 names into our Hall of Fame, including Barb Barrows, Brian Alden, Babatunda Oshinoa, and Brian Sisolak. We had our 8th grade open house to welcome incoming Wildcat families. Our poetry club hosted an open mic night. Our NV dance team finished 14th at state. On February 2nd, 3rd, and 4th, the NV Orchesis team hosted an amazing dance show. We also had course selection days. Shortly after, on February 9th and 10th, we had our annual variety show. Last week, we had our jazz concert on February 13th. This Thursday, we will host Mr. NVHS, which is our annual competition between a select few senior NEQA boys to see who will be crowned Mr. NVHS. A few NEQA students had a blast in the annual City of Naperville Marketing Challenge. NV Cheer made it to the final round of IHSA state competition and finished at 9th. NV Wrestling has 2 state qualifiers, including Dennis Murphy and Jacob Bowmans. Our gymnastics team finished 2nd in their regional competition. NV Chess finished 6th in the IHSA competition. NEQA Speech finished 3rd at their sectional competition. United States Presidential Scholar recipients at NEQA include Kira Chen, Hugh Ah Chen, Connor Parnell, and Justin Zhao. Cameron Scholarship winner and U.S. State Department honor NVHS senior Trisha Prabhu is Trisha Prabhu. The Cameron Scholarship is awarded to 15 students in the country, and it is a 100% scholarship for whichever college she decides to go to.
Wait, what scholarship was that?
That is the Cameron Scholarship,
Wow.
and it's from the U.S. State Department honor. We have some Wildcats with international figure skating success thanks to Isabella Zardini and Alyssa Dunn. They are both on the junior national team, and their team took the gold in Dumfries, Scotland. We are proud to announce that one of our very own French teachers, Madame Backe, was awarded WGN's Teacher of the Month on February 20th. We also hosted Hello, My Name Is, where speakers came and shared their stories on many things that go unspoken in society, and it allowed students to rethink their perspective on many things. This past week, NEQA took home quite a few victories, including Jane Reese finishing 2nd at state thanks to her amazing beam routine in gymnastics, as well as boys swim and dive finishing in 2nd at sectionals, and they have 7 individuals, 3 relays, and 1 diver qualify for state. Neil Pye is the IHSA state champion in special occasion speaking. Overall, great job, Wildcats. Any questions?
How many other students don't have awards? Because they listed like almost everybody in your school.
Well, this Thursday we also have our Wildcat Pride Award, but that's about it. Okay, well then,
Thank you.
everyone, no problem. Everyone have a great night and drive home safely.
Thanks, Kaitlyn.
You too.
Good job.
And now it's time for public comment for non-agenda items. If you are here to speak to an agenda item, that comment will be taken immediately prior to that item. 30 minutes is allowed for public comment, and each person is limited to 3 minutes. When addressing the board, we ask that you respect the confidentiality and safety of our students and school district personnel. We also ask that those addressing the board be cognizant that this is an open meeting and is available to all age groups, and as such, ask that you consider who the audience members are this evening and keep comments age appropriate. Public comment represents the voice and opinion of the speaker. There will be no feedback from board members during the meeting, but follow-up will be provided by an administrator as appropriate. And our first speaker is Matt Titus. Welcome, Matt.
Hi, everybody. First of all, hi, folks. My name's Matt Titus. I'm a member of the Board of Education at Charleston Community School District Number 1. I want to thank Dr. Sullivan and Mr. Carabas, and particularly Dr. McBride, for making today so great for me. I came here because I wanted to see what's possible in public education in Illinois. I know that in our narrow view, we don't always see everything that is in the range of activities. And I got to tour today and speak with staff from your social emotional programs, as well as Project Lead the Way. And I couldn't be more impressed. From top to bottom, it is something that we can really emulate. And I appreciate so much you guys willing to open your doors and welcome a guest from so far away just to see what is going on up here. I invite you to Charleston. Any of you that would like to join us, we would be happy to host you and show you how things are south of I-74. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Thanks.
man.
Questions? Or?
No, it's nice getting a thank you. You know, sometimes they're few and far between, so
Right.
thanks.
Thanks.
I need to get back to EIU. That's my alma mater.
Our next speaker is Laura Estes.
My name is Laura Estes. My daughter is Angie Estes. She's in her 3rd year at Steps at Nequa. She came into this world as a very, very premature triplet. I had her in occupational and physical therapy and special ed both before preschool, during preschool, and since then. Angie was eventually diagnosed with cognitive issues, epilepsy, mild cerebral palsy, and ADHD. Despite all this, in some ways she's high functioning, but in many ways she's not. From early school days, I was told that Angie would eventually be able to work and go to a district program for an additional 4 years. I was also told that she'd be able to take keyboarding skills to counteract her small motor issues that it made it difficult to even write her name. They also said at one point that she would be able to go to COD for vocational classes, maybe even take credit classes. When we moved to Chicagoland 11 years ago, we were told that District 204 was the way to go. Over the years, she's had a number of school changes, left back, put ahead, school district changes, and other school changes several times, which resulted in the loss of familiar faces. With the different school changes, she has often reacted violently, hitting me, pushing me against a wall, not wanting to get out of bed at all. High school was initially isolating, but there were eventually a number of ways to connect. The transition to Steps initially went pretty well. She got to see not only familiar faces from high school, but also those from summer school. Angie started getting bored, but was still willing to go to Steps every day. When we first heard about the plans for Steps to move out of the Wheatland building, the first thing I said was, please don't split them up. They were split up. I knew there'd be trouble, I just knew it. If mainstream kids have problems when the district changes, then special needs kids have problems tenfold. Now it was the fall of 2017. She was supposed to go to the special coach program at the College of DuPage part-time and Steps part-time. When the fall semester came around, she started hitting me and kicking me again in the mornings. Eventually, she dropped out of the coach program due to non-cooperation after I tried all semester to get her to go. She thought she'd see more familiar faces if she went to Steps full-time, but she doesn't see many of the Steps students, even though she's there most of the time. Some were portioned out to Wabanzi and Matea. A couple stayed in the coach program 3 days a week and worked besides. Some just worked part-time or full-time. Some of the parents just decided that their children won't go to Steps at all because of the changes, and the adult children are now home all day. Because of the split up, there aren't as many programs at each Steps location. She now goes to a much more limited program at COD 3 hours a week. Now she's started not wanting to go to Steps every day either. Though there are a number of things that she can do on an iPad or iPhone, there's still no program at Steps to use any computer, a skill they'll all need everywhere for the future. Other programs have been cut back due to the split and for other reasons. There are programs at Nequa that our kids are not allowed to take part in. There's not much these kids can count on anyway. Steps is something they should be able to count on. It is their national right.
Mrs. Estes, can you complete your thoughts in a
Yeah,
couple
I just have
sentences?
one sentence.
Thank
left.
you.
Please come up with a workable plan for these students. Step students should not be treated like second-class citizens, not in 204. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Laura.
And our last speaker is Sally Glavin.
Thank you for not tripping.
I always think I am going to trip over
I
that.
think somebody's gonna do.
It could be me. I've done it before. At the January 8th meeting, it was noted by Mr. Razik, and I quote, "An overcrowded school does not provide the same educational opportunity for students as one that is not overcrowded," end quote. Mr. Racick, I could not agree more with your statement. Taking this fact one step further, since overcrowded schools generally are the result of overcrowded classrooms, I don't think it's much of a stretch to point out again that overcrowded classrooms do not provide the same educational opportunity as classrooms that are not overcrowded. And given your previous statement and professional experience, I don't think you would disagree. Why then the continued silence from the board and administration on this topic? It has been well documented, and yet this issue has been ignored for years. Teachers have seen their class sizes continue to rise year after year. Teachers have told me that they are finding that more students than ever before are seeking out tutors to master their studies, as there is very little time to provide one-on-one attention to every student given their ever-expanding class rosters. Personal connections are getting to be a thing of the past. That alone should give this board pause, especially in today's climate, and push for emotional and social learning. Unless the board challenges administration now for a plan for class size relief, next year will not be any better for our students, and that is a shame. This issue is not going away. You may not have all of the feedback from the Engage 204 meetings yet, but clearly you should be able to discern by now that the community is concerned about 204 class sizes. As an aside, why do you need to wait until July for the Engage 204 summary? Seriously, why will it take so long to summarize that information? The cynic in me says that waiting this long gives the administration a pass to allow large class sizes for another year, sometimes even in excess of the current teacher contract, under the guise that if the classes get too large, they can simply add an aide or pretend to monitor, i.e. ignore this situation again. But there aren't even enough aides in the district to accommodate all the current oversized classes and other special needs, let alone the irony of adding another person to the mix of a room already experiencing overcrowding. Again, kicking this can down the road for another year is not in our students' best interest. The suggestion that instructional coaches will help teachers is also silly, given the fundamental need of lower class sizes. Again, how will adding another person to an already overcrowded room help? Teachers do have institute days, planning periods, continuing education, and even social events with other teachers. They have plenty of resources to help navigate the education part of their job. What they are not given is a right-sized classroom to be able to optimally reach each student. Do you really think the answer is to hire another level of administration to take up space in the classroom? Considering an instructional coach in the Chicago area has an average base pay of almost $63,000 per year, while a new teacher's salary is $43,770 per the current contract, it should be a no-brainer where the money should be spent. Hiring teachers, not instructional coaches, should be the priority. The time to take corrective action is now. Just as you saw the need to make some boundary changes, now please have the courage to start taking steps to lower these class sizes now. Waiting only continues a less than optimal experience for over 28,000 students, and that is not okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Now move to our consent agenda and superintendent report. I'm going to ask Dr. Sullivan to begin.
Okay. This past week has been a very difficult one for parents and educators with the horrific tragedy in Parkland, Florida. Safety and security of our schools is always of utmost importance. I did send out a message to our parents the day after that horrible event to assure them of that. And I do appreciate the amount of supportive responses I received following that message. My hope is that I do not need to send out another one of those messages ever again. So we'll continue to work very hard on keeping our Indian Prairie schools safe as we can. But schools alone cannot solve this problem. We need our leaders to listen, to use some common sense, and get to work to deal with what's become all too commonplace in our society. So I want to now talk about the things that we should be talking about, and that is the great things that our teachers and our school leaders are doing. So Kristen stole a little bit of my thunder because I was going to tell you about Neuqua Valley's World Language teacher, Christina Backe. She is going to be featured on WGN as the Teacher of the Month. So set your DVRs. She will be on the 9 o'clock news on Tuesday, February 27th, and then again on Wednesday, February 28th during the noon newscast. So congratulations to Christina. And then Friday night, we've mentioned before, but Friday night our own Mattia Valley principal, Daryl Eccles, will be honored as the Aurora African American Leader of the Year. And this award is bestowed to someone each year who has demonstrated consistent leadership and a commitment to Aurora's African American community and the city at large. And I just wanted to note that this year, every one of our high school principals have received some prestigious award. So I just wanted to rehash that. So our own Dr. McBride, who's here tonight, received the Terrell Bell Award from the Department of Education this year. Jason Stipp, our Waubonsie Valley principal, was the DuPage County High School Principal of the Year, and now Dr. Eccles receiving this award. So we're really proud of the amazing leadership that we have at our schools. Saturday, we have the both our elementary and middle school robotics tournament. You'll remember our middle school robotics tournament was rescheduled due to our snow event. But both are going to start at Still Middle School on Saturday. The middle school starts at 8:45, elementary starting at 9. We do expect Congressman Bill Foster. He's scheduled to attend and start off the day. We have 2 more Engage 204 sessions in the coming months. Our next meeting is going to be on Monday, February 26th at Still Middle School from 7 to 9 p.m. And the meeting will focus on the state of our facilities. As the board knows, because of our financial situation, we have deferred maintenance over the last decade. So we really need our community to understand the impact of our financial inability to do the work we need to do in our schools and help us prioritize the projects. So again, we encourage everyone to come out, participate in these very important meetings. So visit the Engage 204 website for more information, and we hope to see you on Monday. And finally, we have an administrative position to bring to you tonight. I think we even have a fan club out there for this one. So with Montrine Johnson moving to Waubonsie Valley to replace the retiring Rebecca Schreiber, we have been on the search for an assistant principal for Neuqua Valley. And we are pleased to welcome Sharon Ruff back home to District 204. So Sharon, I'm going to ask you to stand. Sharon's came to us as she's been a dean of students most recently at Glenbard West High School. Her previous teaching experience was in special education here at Waubonsie Valley, right, Sharon? Yes. So we are really excited to welcome you home. We like having people come back to us. So we're really excited to have you join us and excited to recommend Sharon Ruff for your approval to the position of assistant principal at Neuqua Valley High School.
And I need a motion.
With pleasure. I recommend that the Board of Education approve Ms. Sharon Ruff as assistant principal at Neuqua Valley High School as presented.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? A motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Jackie, call the roll, please.
Miss Demming?
Aye.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Miss Peel?
Aye.
Miss Price?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Miss Donahue?
Aye.
Motion passes. Welcome, Sharon.
You're welcome to, you want to at least tell us who's in your cheering section back there? Since they all came, we want to at least get them a little bit on camera maybe, huh?
My number 1 fan, my husband, William, my parents, John and Barbara Moore, former CPS teachers and administrators as well, and professor at Moraine Valley Community College.
Great.
And also my dear friends, Kirsten and Charmaine, who are 204 parents as well.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
And you're
All
done.
right, I'm done.
And so we now move to the consent agenda. I need a motion that the Board of Education approve consent agenda items E through L.
I move that the Board of Education approve consent agenda items E through L as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. Jackie, please call the roll.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Miss Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye.
Miss Donahue?
Aye.
Miss Demming?
Aye.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Miss Price?
Aye.
Motion passes. And now we move to our action items, which is the approval of gifts and donations. May I have a motion, please?
I move that the Board of Education approve the gifts and donation report for first semester 2017-18 as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Dr. Lee?
Good evening, Board. We would like to recognize and thank members of the community for their generous donations every year. The report presented tonight represents gifts and donations provided to our schools for the first semester of this current school year. The generosity shown by our community allows the school district to support and affect the individual lives of many students and their families, both in and outside of the classroom environment. The Indian Prairie Educational Foundation, along with our building PTA groups, continue to be extremely generous in their support of all of our schools. Once again, we would like to thank everyone involved for their donation during this most recent reporting period.
Any questions or comments for Dr. Lee? I guess, as being president, again, I'm overwhelmed with the amount of donations and help that each one of our schools does receive in order to have us function at our highest capacity. And as you mentioned, that includes the foundation, includes a lot of business partners, includes a lot of community partners, and it also includes our parents. And I think together that's what makes a good education system. So it was great. And Dr. Lee, whoever put that report together, did an excellent job. That is a well-formatted report.
Catherine Bauman, I will give her credit.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, Jackie, call the roll.
Ms. Price?
Aye.
Ms. Deming?
Aye.
Mr. Rising?
Aye.
Ms. Peel?
Aye.
Mr. Karubas?
Yes.
Ms. Donahue?
Aye.
Mr. Rasak?
Aye. Motion passes. And now, our discussion item. It's February. And that means Mr. Strang will be with us on a monthly basis, talking about our budget. And let it be so noted that Mr. Strang always is well ahead of the state's budget forecast, so we appreciate that dearly, even though we'll probably actually know what the state's budget forecast is.
Thank you, Mr. Razak. Good evening, board members. As Mr. Razak stated, this is the first of our forecasts. Historically, we've done a number of forecasts monthly as we move into May when the state of Illinois finalizes their budget, and we can get a better handle on firm numbers and where we're going to end up as a school district. In the last couple of years, it's been extremely difficult for the state to come together with their numbers, even in May, June, and July. And so we're going to adjust our timeline this year. In the past, we did a tentative budget in July, a draft budget in July, a tentative budget in August, and asked the board to approve the final budget in September. And that's what we did last year. This year, we've got on the board planning calendar to do the tentative budget the first week of May and approve the budget in June, which is sooner than we've done in the past, but before the fiscal year begins, so it does make sense. But as you pay attention to this presentation tonight, what you will realize is that it's very unlikely the state of Illinois will have all of their finances together and know exactly what we're doing, so it is very likely that next year at some point in time we'll end up amending our budget. Tonight we'll go over the financial forecast, both the operating and non-operating. We'll talk about the state of the new funding formula and where we're at and how that's impacting us as a school district. And then there's the assumptions that we always go over, which is our property values, property taxes, the consumer price index, proration of pension cost shift, and then our future activities, which is to really focus and drill down on the state of Illinois and to meet with our lobbyist group and our interest groups to help us stay attuned to what's going on in Springfield. I'm going to take a little bit of time and go through our operating funds forecast, and it's really likely that this will change quite a bit. And I even brought a laser pen that I may end up using just to point out some areas for you as a Board of Education. Fiscal year 2018 is the budget that we're currently running at this particular point in time. It was passed under the old funding formula. We passed that the second board meeting in September. Under that funding formula, we were a foundation formula district, and our general state aid was impacted positively or negatively by increasing or decreasing enrollment and its association with our property values in our school district. Because our property values were going up and our student enrollment was going down, we were anticipating a loss of $3 million under that old funding formula. And if the state had not changed the funding formula, we'd be spot on with our $39,519,454 in revenue from the state. 6 weeks after the Board of Education approved that budget, the state of Illinois passed the evidence-based funding formula. So the funding formula that they used and we used to build our budget no longer exists, and a new funding formula was enacted. The problem with that is that it wasn't implemented. So we haven't received any of or much of the money from the new funding formula, and we're not sure how we're going to receive that money. So when you look at fiscal year 2018, we're getting $272,313,889 from local resources. The majority of that's our property taxes, our fees, our lunch receipts, and the other things that we collect as a school district locally. The state's $39,519,454 is under the old funding formula, and that's $3 million less than fiscal year 17. The federal money of $9,920,737 hasn't really changed over the last decade, and we don't anticipate it changing going forward. So for total revenue, we projected $321,754,080. Now, as I said before, we were hoping that once the evidence-based funding formula had washed out and implemented and we knew exactly what we were receiving, we were going to come back to the Board of Education sometime in February or March or April and amend our budget and put the true numbers of what we should be receiving from the state in. At this point in time, we're hearing that we won't know what we're receiving or really begin to receive any of that until after school lets out. So it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to amend the budget this year. We have to have a tentative budget, put it on display for 30 days, and then the board has to approve the final amended budget. Just, it's the same process as we go through during the normal budget period. So we would lead at least the middle of June to get the tentative budget in, and then July, or excuse me, the middle of May, and then the middle of June to pass the amended budget before the fiscal year ends on June 30th. Mr. Rising, you look like you have a question for me, sir.
I was going to ask a question, wait till after. So what I hear you saying is, based on what we know with the evidence-based funding formula, even though it hasn't been finalized, it was passed, but the State Board of Education is still deciding how those indicators are going to equal dollars. Having just heard you say that we're not sure because we don't know what's going to happen at the state, that 49 million you have projected under fiscal year 19, that could change, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so that's wishful thinking?
It's, that is, in my opinion, the best case scenario from the state of Illinois, given what I know about the evidence-based funding formula and the conversations that I've had with the people in ISB's main office in funding and disbursement.
And you and I can have a conversation with this. I'll come in and talk to you, but I was under the understanding it was only going to maybe be 1 million more than we're getting currently, and if that's 39 million, you know, so I was just surprised to see that number of 49, but I can come in and talk to you because I know you've been involved in some of those conversations.
Yeah, and I'll go through in detail in a later slide how that breaks out.
Okay.
I can tell you this is that we were one of a dozen pilot schools that they asked to collect data to see if their measurements were correct, the number of staff members we have by position, the types of students we have. And we discovered early that they were off significantly in our ELL numbers, and then through conversations felt pretty confident that they were off across the state in their ELL numbers. So that might have delayed it a little bit. Certainly some of the politics going on in Springfield has delayed it. And last week, ISB released our last and final opportunity to review, across the state, to review numbers as the baseline evidence-based funding numbers going forward. And I think we have until the 27th of this month to submit those. So they're still collecting data to just figure out how it's to be distributed. All indications are is we're pretty solidly a Tier 2 district, and no matter what happens with that pie, we're not going to move out of Tier 2 at any time in the near future.
Your 2018 column, though, is given existing formulas. It's not the evidence-based, right? And
Right.
so you would add like another 3 million estimated to that column if you were trying to make it look evidence-based.
If we were moving that evidence-based, we would add about another $8.5 million to
Okay.
that column. And I'll go through in another slide where that's at. And that's actually what occurs in 1920 and moving forward. So there is an increase in that.
Mr. Strang, would you like us to wait till the end?
I don't mind the questions as we go along, Mr. Razak.
Thank you.
And I don't mind popping between slides once we get into this.
I have one more question. So usually you're conservative with your outlooks and estimate, but you just said that this was like a best case view. I guess I'm surprised you would be best case given your conservative nature and everything.
I might be a little surprised by that too. Thanks for pointing that out. So we do see an increase in state money in fiscal year 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. And with that increased money, there's a number of elements that the evidence-based funding model says you should apply that money to. Had we received that money this year, we would have had conversations in the cabinet about, okay, we've got extra funds, how do we put that money into action so that it improves student learning across the school district? And that would be the work of the cabinet, approved by the Board of Education. Because that didn't occur, we've held off on those conversations because we don't really know how much we're going to receive, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I had to put that money somewhere in 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, and split that into salaries and benefits and in the other to see, if that money becomes available, how we resource it and implement it so that it impacts student achievement. With that, I tried and keep the budget as balanced as possible, and you can see that we run a slight deficit moving forward, but it's not a deficit that, as a school district, we've ever not been able to handle through a variety of other means. And I have to tell you, as I say every year during the first forecast, it's really difficult to forecast out to 2023 when the state of Illinois hasn't even given you what you deserve or should have received in the current fiscal year. And as we move into future forecasts, I'll move that down to a 3-year forecast because it's just so unlikely that so many things change. It's much easier to kind of predict what's happening with our property values and with the consumer price index and with new construction, because the folks that I work with locally that help me collect that information are really, really good at what they do. So I feel more confident about those numbers going out than I do from the state going out by a long shot. We do keep our fund balance as a percent of revenue above the 25%, and continue through the length of this forecast to meet the district goal to operate efficiently and effectively, and I don't see any reason why that won't continue. On the non-operating side, as you all know, we've got bonds that we're paying down, and our final bonds payments will happen in 2027. Our payments are roughly $28 million a year. Our opportunities to refinance those bonds are gone now because we've taken advantage of all of that we possibly could. And we've saved taxpayers millions and millions of dollars in doing so. We didn't extend the life of the bonds, but we took advantage of lower interest rates to refinance those bonds for savings. And those savings go directly back to the taxpayers, and that's something that we'll continue to do. What's not in this non-operating budget is both the revenue and expenditure of the debt certificates. This is just the bonds and the capital projects. As you know, we've got just under $10 million of debt certificates we have to pay off, and we are on track to pay those off when we receive our first installment from the developer to purchase our 25 acres, which initially we hoped would happen in January, but it was more likely to happen in March. Dr. Sullivan and I were with the city 6 or 8 weeks ago and talking with their developers and the mayor, and during that time had an opportunity to make sure, touch base with them about how the due diligence on that property was coming, and they saw no problem with that sale going through and them approving the property to be developed. So that's a good thing. So I really truly hope that sometime in the spring I'll come to the board with a resolution to pay off those debt certificates, and that will be out of the way. The roughly $28 million locally that you're receiving in revenue is a separate levy that you all approve in December, and it's money that pays off our schools. So we collect it, we pay off our bonds, and we move to the next year, and it's like making your car payments, and we'll be done with those car payments in 2027. When that occurs, you know, we've got our rates for our operating funds, and we've got our rates for our non-operating funds. Those rates for our non-operating funds will fall off, they'll disappear. And so tax rates across the district will drop substantially when that occurs. And we hold a pretty solid fund balance of 50% in those funds. So what are the pressures in the forecast? We've got an evidence-based funding formula, but it hasn't been implemented. We continue to have uncertainty from the state of Illinois. It's it's almost March, and we haven't been funded fully. Our health insurance costs have increased. We increased our health insurance rates by 7%, and it looks like we'll have to increase them again. With the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, we've had a number of folks get on the plan who are expensive and have impacted the cost of our insurance, and so we expect that to continue. On Friday, Mr. DePaul and I will be involved in the facilities and maintenance bid opening, and we anticipate that we'll probably see an increase in the cost of that contract. Currently it's with Airmark, and the reason for that is our salaries are much lower than our neighboring districts, and we can't hold on to employees, and for us to be able to hold on to our employees, we've got to increase those salaries. As you know, the board approved a 2-year transportation contract with First Student, and that was a 7% in the first year and a 9% second year increase. So we're seeing an increase in our transportation costs. That still is much better than some of our neighboring comparable districts where they were seeing a 20% increase in transportation in 1 year. So we feel pretty good about that. Last Wednesday, the governor spoke and gave his budget proposal, and he talked about pension cost shift. 25% a year over those 4 years is $3.8 million, and it compounds. I put together in the forecast what that would look like for us, but I didn't want to share that because this is difficult enough. But it's available, and I will share with the board if you have an interest in it. But I did want to see what it looked like to our bottom line, and there's always the possibility of a property tax freeze.
So you said that real fast, so say that slow.
Which part?
The 3.8 million, then it compounds every year. I just want people to understand that went by really quick.
Yeah,
But that's what the district might be facing.
Right. The governor's proposal would cost $3.8 million compounded each of the next 4 years if it was implemented.
That's the pension.
The pension cost shift, correct.
Thank
What are the
you.
So in layman's terms, essentially after 4 years phase in, it would be over $15 million per year that the district would have to find to pay pensions.
Correct.
So just so people know, when they hear pension cost shift, it sounds great that the state is putting the burden on the school districts, but the burden that the school districts are in particular after 4 years would be $15 million per year that we would have to find that revenue somewhere.
Correct. Thank you for pointing that out. There are some positives in the forecast. The new state funding system helps us out. If they implement it the way that they said that they would implement it, we do better than we would have under the old funding formula. Does it bring us on par with our comparable districts or bring us to where we need to be? Not even close. And it doesn't even bring us close to implementing the evidence-based funding system. It just gives us a little bit more money. It gives us a little more breathing room. We've seen an increase in our investment revenue. When the Great Recession hit, we invest hundreds of millions of dollars, and we were seeing $150,000 in return. Now we're seeing close to $1 million in return. So in this forecast, we adjusted for the improved investments. The improved economy and the consumer price index is starting to creep back up, and that's a good thing because, as I said in the past, our local revenues are most reliable, and it is the one that we've really only seen any growth out of in the last decade. And then the last positive in the forecast is that we're continuing to get developments throughout the district. It's residential development for the most part, which brings students, which is difficult to deal with. It would be better if it wasn't all residential, if it was much more business or small business, industry, because you receive the taxes and you don't receive the students that you have to deal with. But there are some positives in the forecast. Now here's a sheet that I want to spend a little bit of time on. We have three funding sources, our local, which we talked about, and the consumer price index is really what bears how much more we're going to receive year over year. So if the consumer price index is up, we receive a little bit more, and if the consumer price index is down like it has been, you don't receive so much. The other thing that you receive locally is new property. So if there's a new development that occurs or a new car dealership that comes online, we receive additional revenue from that we didn't have the prior year. The state funding is our second source, and it used to be the foundation formula that we received our funds from. Now it's the evidence-based funding model. And if you look within there, I've got three different colored highlights. The yellow is our base funding minimum. And our base funding minimum is what we actually received from the state of Illinois in fiscal year 17. So that's what they said you're going to receive in 18 and in 19 and going forward, is that base funding minimum. That's how we ended up $3 million better than we would have under the old formula in 18, because in fiscal year 17, we had more students and our property values weren't as high. So we actually were receiving $3 million more from the state in 17 than we would have in 18. So there's $3 million additional there. In addition to that, there's the categorical payments that they carved out of the funding formula: special ed private facility, orphanage, driver's education, early childhood block grant, and transportation. Those are all separate payments, and they're to come quarterly. We're just coming up on the third quarter of this year, and on Friday we received our first payment of $2.4 million. So they're really behind two payments. If they hadn't paid us on Friday, I'd be reporting to you now that they haven't paid us anything at all. Dr. Sullivan, you want to say something?
I just wanted to clarify, because I think you prorated these though, right? Because these have always historically been prorated. We've never gotten 100% funding.
Right.
So
these are all prorated at their rate of fiscal year 17. So this is not 100% funding in those categorical payments. And we were told that we shouldn't expect 100%. The final piece is the Tier 2 funding, because we're a Tier 2 district, and that's the new money to implement the evidence-based funding model. It's $971,594. Not a lot of money when you're talking about how large our budget is. The state of Illinois, through that process, said that they're going to put $350 million a year toward additional each year towards education until every district is adequately funded. Okay, well, we're getting $971,000 the first year. They've got a ways to go with us. So that's where the difference is in fiscal year 19 state money and fiscal year 18 state money on that first operating spreadsheet. Does that make sense? Now, I'll tell you that they said that each year they're supposed to increase that by $350 million. I have a hard time believing they're going to be able to come up with all of that money to implement evidence-based funding, and so that really helps us like it needs to as a school district. With that new money, they came up with 26 different elements, and there's really more than 26 because there's 22A, 22B, 22C, right down the line. But those elements are what the evidence and the research says. If you apply the new funds to those areas, you should have some student achievement. I won't go into depth because this is really leadership services and curriculum services, but the fact of the matter is that they're saying that you should have so many classroom teachers per student, so many special education teachers per student, so many administrators per student, you should have so many interventions per student, you should have so much money that you're given to ELL, but there's also maintenance operations, central office, and employee benefits that they expect you to be able to pay so that you're retaining good teachers for your area. Well, we're getting $971,000 plus those categoricals. We should have been receiving those this year. If we had been receiving those this year as a cabinet, we'd be looking at those and saying, here are the areas that we believe we can put the money to impact student achievement. And then that's the conversation we would have had with you as a Board of Education. If that money comes in 19, that's the conversation we will have with you in the fall. That, you know, here's the things that we're going to implement to impact student achievement. But we haven't had the opportunity to have those conversations because none of the money has showed up yet. So if that money had shown up, if that additional revenue had shown up, you can see where our comparable districts are. Now, we're a Tier 2 district. Of our comparable districts, 3 of them are Tier 2. The rest are Tier 3 or Tier 4. Tier 3 are more wealthy. Tier 4 are the wealthiest. You can see that Barrington would, if it was $100 that we were distributing across the state, Barrington, Naperville, and Elmhurst would be splitting a penny. Just to put it in the context. So Barrington, Naperville, and Elmhurst, and St. Charles could implement every single one of those elements and have money left over. That's what that chart states. We are at 80%. So roughly, we can't do 20% of those elements. We're short even with that new money. So to put it into context a different way, over the course of those 10 years, if the state was to come up with the $350 million that they're going to distribute across all school districts, we're short $62 million. So between now and 2029, we should receive $62 million more, and then we would be able to implement all of those elements. I don't see them coming up with $62 million for Indian Prairie School District, but maybe there's my pessimistic side again.
There's a conservative side.
That's right.
There's my
Yeah,
conservative side. But you can see that some of our comparable districts have that and some. So it's supposed to be equal and equitable, and someday it might be, but it's not quite yet today. Now, to the assumptions that I feel better about, because I put them together, our total EAV is going to continue to increase. It's going to climb. It's going to climb because our property values are going up by about 4% on existing property, and we are still receiving new construction, and I'm meeting with developers pretty regularly about the opportunity to do something within the school district. So we're going to see our property values go up. The total EAV percent change is just over 4%. You can see in 19, 20, 21, and 22, it's about 4.7%. That's a combination of the 4% increase in existing property on the bottom left and the $45 million of new property we're expected to receive, or I'm forecasting to receive moving into the future. And you can see that in 16 and in 17, I had $45 million in new property, and we came in at 65 and 55, so that number is conservative. I think going out to 21 and 22, the further you go out, it's going to start to slow down because we're really running out of space to develop. And for every $10 million of new property, we receive roughly $500,000 in additional revenue. And that depends upon the year and what's going on with the tax rate, but that's a good general number. Consumer Price Index, last year we had a 2.1% CPI, and that's what we levied against our taxes. In 18, when I was doing this last year with you all, I said it'd be at 2%, it came in at 2.1%, so I got lucky there, right? So I'm going to stick with the 2% in 19, 20, 21, and 22. Hopefully we hit that. Hopefully the economy improves and we continue to have the consumer price index move up and we don't have a property tax freeze. Property tax freeze, pension costs if, and it's a game changer. With those things occurring, our tax rate is dropping. So that's a good sign. When our tax rate's climbing, that's when I receive phone calls from the community in the springtime, and when our tax rate is dropping, I don't receive those phone calls. So that's a good sign. So, and our tax rate's dropping both in our operating and our non-operating funds, which is a good thing. And again, in 10 years, we won't have that dark blue line there anymore because our bonds will be paid off. So it'll drop pretty substantially at that period of time. So where are we at? It's early in the budget forecasting cycle, but we will be moving to a budget cycle earlier this year because in May I'm going to try and get a tentative budget to you all, and I hope that the state gives us more information. It'll be a tentative budget with the type of speculation that I put in the forecast. And then in June we'll pass the tentative budget and make it our spending plan. But it's very, very likely that we'll amend that sometime next year. I'd like to tell you it would be in the fall, but the way the state's looking, I don't know when we'll know exactly what we're going to receive from the state of Illinois. They're supposed to have their budget together by the end of May. I don't think the assumptions for the local revenue and expenditures is off much. It's really the state, so that's what we'll be paying attention to. I'll continue to keep you updated either through these presentations or board memos. And again, we'll be transitioning from a forecast at some point in time to a budget. If things really are not any clearer, I'll talk to Dr. Sullivan, and maybe it does make sense to, pass the budget later in the summer again, but it'd be nice to get it over with. With that, any questions?
Jay, as Ms. Donahue already pointed out, you are very optimistic, which is unusual, but any ideas what we would look like on a worst or mid-case scenario from a standpoint of the evidence-based funding from the state? Any ideas on percentage-wise what?
I think they're going to give us our base funding minimum, and I think they're going to give us the tier funding because it's such a political triggers. But where they've always gone to first is not paying us all of our categoricals. So I think, that honestly, it's very likely that we'll receive partial payments or that they'll prorate those even deeper. So I think on my screen and up there it looks like a burnt orange kind of a color. Mm-hmm. I think that's where, if they don't fund us completely, that's where they'll.
Okay,
Yeah, let me, right in here. That's where they won't fund us. Yeah.
That's about 10 million, right? Is that about 10 million?
Yeah.
So this is new for me, us getting a budget as early as we're going to get it. Because in my 7 years on board, we've never passed a budget until September, until we were already into the year. I know in the past, one of the problems we've always had, because we've been waiting for the state to tell us what they were going to give us, that's why we had to wait so long to make our budget based on what the state gave us. It's kind of still the same situation we're in. Is the hope, though, with administration that this will help us if we have to get those new hires to be able to do that a little earlier? Because I know sometimes we've waited, and that's kind of hurt us with some of the hiring pool that's out there. Do you see that improving, or?
I don't know that we've had to
those
wait.
Discussions.
Yeah, we've had to wait that long. I think that we had some discussions about, we wait,
Yeah.
and we still don't know. And so I think, we talked about just doing it and having an amended budget and just moving forward, because it doesn't seem like we ever get what we need to know on time anyway.
All right, I'll be the pessimist in the room. Slide 6, I think it is, the base funding minimum. What happens when the state doesn't fund enough in the formula to meet the base funding minimum?
If they don't fund enough that it goes to the base funding minimum, then it goes to a per-student proration, which is, kind of impacts us like the old funding formula was. Our enrollment drops, we would receive less from the state.
They wouldn't do that.
Wait, but I thought they had,
So a per student reduction. So if our base funding minimum would be 36 up here? I don't, give me an example of how that works.
If they don't fund enough to fund the base funding minimum across all districts in the state of Illinois, if it's 10% less, it's not going to be a 10% proration across all districts evenly. It's going to be a proration against students in the district. So if our enrollment's dropping, which it is, we would receive a greater proration than we would if it was just a straight 10% proration. Does that make sense?
It does.
That is a terrible scenario.
You're welcome.
God, I hate to even ask these hypothetical questions because you never know with the state of Illinois, but, so they could actually prorate the base funding minimum, but still increase the ed funding by 350 million as they promised they would do?
No, they
Okay.
won't.
They cannot do that. Okay, good. Well, that's at least a good thing.
So if they don't fund enough to fund the base funding minimum, do the tiers come into play at all?
No.
Since we moved to this per student?
I don't see how they can possibly continue to come up with $350 million. And
well, they're going to have to.
The cost, the pension cost shift has got to be a big player in that, so that they get that burden off and onto the school districts. Then they'd be able to fund more of the tiers, but we'd be receiving more of the expense. You know, and if we receive that money for the tiers, we're obligated to put that towards the tiers, not towards the pensions. That makes sense.
So that's like a shell game to me. So we're gonna give 350 million, but everybody's gonna have to pick up the pension cost shift. And whatever was supposed to be used for those 26, and there's supposed to be 28, I think, factors for education, then gets diminished because of the pension cost shift. I mean, this needs to be clear to people. As Mr. Rising said, pension cost shift sounds great. And if I was I am a taxpayer, that sounds great until I sit on the board and then figure out what it does to the educational system and perhaps my property values in the long term. So this is a bit of a shell game, at least in my estimation, if that occurs. And again, we're in political season, and I'm now been here 4 or 5 years, and I understand, don't get like wound up because things will change.
But, okay, I have a question, because if those dollars would still have to go towards the 26 or 28 elements, correct?
That's correct.
So that means we'd be even at a more disadvantage, because that has to go for those elements, not towards the pension.
Correct.
So we still have to make up a
So we'd
$15
have to
million
make,
deficit.
so we'd have to make that up.
Or, I mean, a $15 million
Now, the governor
shift.
did allude that there would be funding mechanisms for that. Presently, we can't levy for that. You can for IMRF, but you can't for TRS.
Well, yeah. I mean, we don't want to talk hypotheticals, but in order for them to shift the pension cost shift, they would have to release PTEL, which is the tax cap that school districts are held to, of which they can raise property taxes. So while it sounds good that the state's relieving themselves of the pension burden, essentially what they're doing, once again, the state is putting that burden to fund the schools and now to fund the pensions onto the property taxpayers.
We'll see if it happens.
Yeah.
We've been talking about it, it's sooner or later. I do believe it's going to happen, but I don't know when. It could be next year, it could be 5 years from now. But, you know, just like a lot of this, you know, the state hasn't done a lot yet. All of our assumptions are driven around the state of Illinois.
If there's any legislators listening, since 70% of our tax bill is paying for our local education, it would be smart if they would get smart down in Springfield and put more money towards education, because that would allow local districts to keep their property taxes flatter. It's just a suggestion.
Other comments?
I think the message is, show me the money. That's what you've been telling the state. Okay, got it.
Ms. Donahue and Mr. Kruger? Thank you, Mr. Strang. Board update very briefly. As Dr. Sullivan said, I'm sure the board joins her in expressing, I guess, our hearts being broken with what happened at Parkland. Like her, we encourage that our local people, our state people, and our federal people engage in conversation. This can't happen to our kids.
I've been so impressed with the students who have from that high school and their activism. It's just the one beautiful thing that it's just been amazing.
And I think they've got so far at least, they've got a lot of adult support, and I think that needs to continue. I applaud their efforts as well, and, you know, these kids have grown up with school shootings, and I think it's finally time. They've had enough. I mean, I think that, and we're hearing that, so I personally support what they're doing.
You know, I would also say that on top of our students advocating, that they also, when they see or hear something in social media that doesn't look right, doesn't sound right, that they speak up and they tell a teacher or administrator or send something anonymous into the police station. I mean, you know, it's our students in some cases too, from a social media standpoint, that are on the front lines of seeing some of this stuff. So we rely on them a lot of times too. So I hope they continue to speak up in that way as well.
I guess I also want to say we've been blessed by having 2 school safety officers, the central office who is working with our administration and working with our principals and working with our schools. I think the board made a good decision when we approved that position, and the 2 people who have been in that position are the top people in the area. I want to reassure the community that these are the top, really the top 2 people in the community. I couldn't figure out who else to pick for these positions that is at Indian Prairie, trying to guarantee that our children are safe. So we appreciate that. A couple days ago, I finally sent the Indian Prairie School District reference memorandum for all our policies. It's a summary sheet. I want to thank everyone for all your contributions. I think it almost reads right now. Left up to my own devices, it's not so good. As a team, we did a great job, so thank you so much. And then Jackie sent something today from IASB. It's an evaluation instrument that they're asking you to fill out and complete it by March 8th in order that we can conduct our own self-evaluation on April 11th, 2018. So make sure you mark that date, but look in your email when you get home and fill out that survey. Anything else? With that, I need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Approved.